Welcome to your literacy narrative. This video is the first in a series of videos that will help guide our process from beginning to end as we embark on this project called the literacy narrative. This video is meant to introduce you to the literacy narrative project overall. As such, we're going to be guided by several key questions that we always have when walking into a particular project. The first of those questions is, what is the process for beginning and completing this project? The next question we'll consider is, what is a literacy narrative? What do I write about? What do I need to consider when writing a narrative? How do I begin? How should I plan and draft my literacy narrative? How should I shape my literacy narrative essay? And what are some key elements needed for an effective literacy narrative? Please keep in mind that there's a lot of questions that will be answered in this video, but they're meant as only a starting off point, understanding that we will dive deeply into each piece or each part and draft of this narrative from beginning to end. So let's look at the process for beginning and completing this project. You notice on the left, we see this infographic. And the infographic shows us some of the steps to the writing process that we are typically familiar with. These are things that we've encountered in past experiences or ways that we think about our writing process. They could be ways that you think about the writing process in an academic setting, all the way to the ways or the process that you use in order to bring a text from invention to publication. You'll notice that that infographic does not go in a straight line. You'll notice that it is not neatly bound, that it's curvy. And you notice that when you get to the drafting, you have this loop that goes through. That is because the way we want to focus on writing in this class, all of our projects will focus on writing as one, socially constructed, and two, a recursive process. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we will be collaborating throughout our writing process. We will take part in multiple different activities and workshops that will allow us to help each other and work together to develop our text. It also means that we're going to look at writing from a recursive standpoint, meaning that while we will bring our drafts from a beginning to an end, we also want to understand that every time we engage with a text, with our text, there will be things that we will want to change and to shift. Therefore, the writing process could theoretically go on forever. We will publish this, meaning you'll submit it into Canvas in a final draft format. But before we get to that point, you will be going through several drafts with specific goals in mind. This particular essay will be a literacy narrative, which we will discuss further in just a minute, developed to at least 1,000 polished words, and it will develop through 3 drafts. And I say polished because by the time you submit into Canvas for that final time, they will be polished through a process of drafting that will include content workshops, they will include collaborative peer review, and they will include one-on-one conferences with me. Each draft will incorporate specific workshops to help develop it from invention to final submission. And that's the goal, to support the process from beginning to end. The first draft that we'll work on will bring it to about 400 words. And this draft is designed to just get your ideas down on paper. This is not the time to focus on your structure or even organization. It is what you might call a brain dump. Many times when we're writing, sometimes if we're staring at that blank screen, it gets daunting. If we fill it with words, if we fill it with ideas, we can then begin to shape those ideas into the goal of the essay. The second draft that we will focus on will be at least 800 words. And bringing that first draft to the second will be done through 2 specific workshops that will focus on 1, essay structure, and focused paragraphs, as well as narrative techniques to guide your story. So you can see when you get to this second draft, now we're taking those ideas from that first draft and beginning to shape them into that essay structure and thinking about the narrative and the organization of our story. The second draft is what we call the conference draft. And this means that we're going to use this draft in a one-on-one conference to discuss the draft strengths and areas where you would like more guidance. Not to worry, there's a whole page in Canvas that focuses on the conference draft and how you sign up to meet with me. During that time, we're going to look at and think about how we would bring that second draft of at least 800 words to the third draft of at least 1,000 words. And this is the draft that is getting close to the final draft. We will use it to participate in a peer review where you have an opportunity to get audience response and then put some finishing touches on it before submitting the final polished draft. Again, don't worry. There will be a detailed page in Canvas describing how we will engage in peer review. Once you put the finishing touches on it based on our peer review feedback, you'll be ready to submit. So let's now dive into the project itself. What is a literacy narrative? Over the last couple of weeks, we've focused on a couple of readings that have guided our understanding or even experiences of other people's literacy and how those experiences have shaped their identity and who they are. Each of us has different sponsors of literacy or people, places, and things that have shaped our learning and literacy. While we've looked at it through the lens of other people, now we're going to shift our focus, turn the mirror on ourselves, and think about our own literacy identity. Reflection about our experiences with these sponsors helps us to better understand how our literacy has been and continues to be shaped. The autobiographical essay gives you an opportunity to reflect upon your own reading and writing experiences. This narrative will be developed into a well-told story that includes vivid details, allowing your audience to experience the significance of these experiences, how they have impacted you, and what they mean to the past, current, and future you. Literacy narratives are first and foremost stories. More importantly, they are your stories. We all have experiences that have shaped us as readers and writers, and told together, they create the narrative of how we would describe our literacy identity. So, what do I write about? Well, for this paper, you'll compose a narrative or story about your literacy. Think back to Malcolm X's Literacy Behind Bars and Amy Tan's Mother Tongue for inspiration. Remember how Malcolm X's literacy was shaped by his lived experiences in prison, and Amy Tan's literacy was shaped by her experiences straddling two languages. When we think about the sponsors of literacy that they both encountered, and those are the people, places, and things that impacted or shaped their literacy, Malcolm X may reflect on the fact that prison itself was a sponsor of his literacy, and without that experience, perhaps his literacy would have been shaped very differently. Think about also that the dictionary played a role and was a sponsor to his literacy because it became the focal point for how he chose to engage in his own literacy. Also think about Bimby. That was the person who really inspired Malcolm X to want to have that knowledge. Remember at the beginning, he focused on and was almost a little bit jealous of the knowledge that Bimby had. Amy Tan's sponsors, or the things that shaped her literacy, you might describe as her mother, coming from a Chinese American background. Navigating the languages and the barriers to those languages as she dove into the profession of writer. As you begin to ideate or brainstorm about your own narrative, you want to think about the people, places, and events that have shaped your literacy. This may lead you to write about your early memories of learning, to read and write at home or at school, or you may think of literacy in a broader sense, focusing on one or more of the following. Computer literacy, learning how to program, how to read the web efficiently, or how to communicate through text messaging, blogging, and so on. Workplace literacy, perhaps including ways of talking to customers, colleagues, and managers. Academic literacy, perhaps focusing on learning how to think, talk, and write as a scientist, historian, literacy critic, and so on. Music literacy, you can focus on this as a musician or as a fan of certain kinds of music. Community literacy, focusing on how we communicate with people of different ages or with people who speak different languages or dialects. This idea of literacy is very broad, and we can see just from the ideas on this page that the different types of literacies we have are shaped by different experiences we have. In your literacy narrative, you may choose to focus on one of these types of literacies or broaden it a bit and just think about your overall experiences. So what do I need to consider when writing a narrative? While we are framing this assignment through the lens of a literacy narrative, meaning stories and experiences that have shaped you as a reader and writer, it is first and foremost a narrative. That means it's a written account of linked events. In other words, a narrative is a story. In a narrative, the writer draws upon stories, anecdotes, memories, experiences, readings, and other events and descriptions that allow you to offer readers the most vivid, interesting, and insightful explanations you can about yourself and your literacy. These memories and stories are linked together through a theme. The theme of your narrative ties your stories together and provides your audience with a focus or plot of your narrative. So how do I begin? Many of our discussions over the last couple weeks can contribute to your invention process as you begin to ideate about your literacy narrative. Think back on the discussion boards that we have contributed to. We started by defining literacy and thinking about ways that it shaped us. Then we interacted with Amy Tan and Malcolm X, and we had a discussion board based on how those narratives or those literacy experiences shaped each of them. To further assist you, there are several questions that may be helpful for you as you begin. These questions are meant to guide your invention process and allow you to spend time reflecting on who and or what has shaped your literacy. Now, these questions are meant to begin the ideation phase or brainstorming phase. These questions are included on the page in Canvas that introduces this project. So as part of this first process to begin brainstorming and begin to think about that first draft, you want to first think about taking some notes, just maybe doing a free write on the following questions. Again, this is just a way to get your ideas out. And then begin to look at them and shape them and think about what are these answers? What is this writing telling me about my literacy and my experiences? So again, these questions are just meant to guide a brainstorming or ideation phase. One question you might consider is, how did you learn to write and or read? Second, what kinds of writing have you done in the past? How much have you enjoyed or not enjoyed the various kinds of writing or reading you've done? What are particularly vivid memories that you have of reading, writing, or activities that involved them? Now we're getting into not just the types of experiences that you had, but what are some specific vivid memories that you have regarding your reading and writing process and learning how to read or write? What's your earliest memory of reading? What's your earliest memory of writing? What sense did you get as you were learning to read or write of the value of reading and writing, and where did that sense come from? Notice that question is now guiding you towards some of the people, places, events that perhaps shaped and helped shape your literacy. What frustrated you about reading or writing as you were learning, and then as you progressed through school? By the same token, what pleased you or what excited you? What kind of writing or reading do you do most commonly? What are your current attitudes, feelings, or stances toward reading or writing? To whom or what do you attribute those feelings or attitudes? How did you get to where you are as a writer, reader? What is your past? What in your past has made you the kind of writer, reader you are today? Who are some of the people in your life who have acted as literacy sponsors? What are some institutions or experiences in your life that have acted as literacy sponsors? Remember, literacy sponsors are those people, places, events, things that have helped shape in some way, um, shape, or form, impacted your literacy. That impact could have been that they encouraged your literacy. It could have been that they suppressed your literacy. It could have been that they withheld your literacy. Perhaps they modeled literacy for you. Perhaps they taught literacy to you. Okay. Maybe they were a mentor. So when we say literacy sponsor, we're looking for those people, places, and things that have impacted us. You notice the totality of these questions and some of the things that might come out of it is very reflective in nature. And one of the things I urge you is this is a narrative and it is about you. And so taking the time to reflect and give yourself that space to engage in the reflective process allows you to then begin to think about the totality of your story. What is it that you want to focus on with regards to your literacy narrative? Now, we'll go further into detail with regards to these next couple of pieces, but I want to just bring them out so that you have an idea of kind of where we're headed. So, how should I plan and draft my literacy narrative? Well, once you've taken part in that reflective process, guided by the questions, as well as some of your other thoughts, perhaps the discussion boards might yield some ideas too, but calling upon that material you generated through the questions that were in the previous slide, you want to think about the so what, or the central point you would like your literacy narrative to convey. In other words, what's the plot of your literacy narrative? What themes connect the experiences that have shaped your literacy? Once you have that central point or theme to your narrative, you can use the experiences, ideas, and insights from your notes to then begin to put together your story. And that story will describe, explain, and support the central point you want to make about your own literacy. Because your literacy narrative tells the particular person, you, its shape will depend on the particular experiences you've had and the importance you attach to them. Therefore, it's difficult to suggest a single structure for the literacy narrative that will work for all writers. However, we will be guided in our workshops by specific narrative techniques. One of the next questions that we want to think about, and we will go again into much more detail on this. However, I wanted to again bring it up just so we can kind of shape the project overall. One of the questions we always ask is, how should I shape my literacy narrative? I want you to think about different stories that you've encountered, different ways in which people tell their story. Some of the different narratives or structures for narratives include the following. There's only 3 ideas up here, but it'll at least get us started. The first one is say, let's say a chronological order. And that means we move the audience from beginning to end. That means we're going to introduce the story, describe the setting and the people, tell what happened, say how the story was resolved or how it ended, and then say something significant about the story. Another idea would be to start in the beginning, beginning in the middle. That means you start in the middle of the action, giving enough information to let the readers know what was happening. Then you begin to fill in details such as setting, people, specific actions. Make clear how the situation was resolved or how it ended, and then say something significant about it. The third idea is to start your narrative at the end of your story. Start at the end of the story, tell how the story ends up, right? Then introduce the subject. go back to the beginning of the story, telling what happens chronologically and describing the setting and the people, and then conclude by saying something about the story's significance. As you look at these ideas, you could probably in your mind have different movies or different books that you've read that have been guided by these different narrative structures. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it certainly gets us started. We're nowhere near this phase at this point, but this is just again a way to kind of think about the project overall. So what are some key elements needed for an effective literacy narrative? Well, the first is to create a well-told story. Again, it's a narrative. This is a literacy narrative, so it's a personal narrative, so it's a well-told story about you and your experiences with reading and writing, your experiences with who or what has shaped your literacy. You bring your narrative to life by using concrete and vivid details. This is told beyond just the point of retelling your experiences. Instead, it should draw the audience into the moment by your use of description, narration, dialogue, figurative language. We'll dive into this much more deeply during our workshop that moves our draft from the first draft to the second draft. You want to develop your central point or theme and include it in your essay. In other words, your narrative must have a so what to it. What ties your experiences together? Again, go back to your favorite book or movie. There's a plot. There's something that ties the experiences of that narrative together. And without it, you don't have a so what, and your audience is kind of wandering through without being able to tie or land those ideas. You also want to develop your literacy narrative with thorough description of your experiences with reading and writing and their significance in your life. So again, we're bringing together this idea of a personal narrative, a story about you, through a specific lens of your experiences with literacy, your experiences that have shaped who you are with literacy, and those experiences with learning how to read and write. So what are your next steps? Well, in this stage, prior to even getting to that first draft, you want to go through a process of reflection, ideation, reflection again. Again, go back to those questions that we saw earlier that are listed also in Canvas on the intro page for this project. And this allows you to really kind of sit with each of those ideas, do some free writing, jot down some notes, and then begin to think about what theme or central point or plot ties these experiences together that you want to bring forth in your literacy narrative. Our next workshop will be focused on shaping your text, the structure and paragraphs. We're going to focus on using your reflections and ideas to begin thinking about how you can best structure and organize your text based on your overall goals of the narrative. Before we get to this, though, go back through, reflect, ideate, reflect again, to make sure that you've got enough drawn on your notes to then be able to look at the overall picture or plot or goal of your narrative. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to this project with you. Until then, keep on writing.